I saw Paul trying to get you together. I was the only person. I was excited. I was yeah. I saw that. And it was like, all the games, it would
Phil, we are live on Wisconsin International Radio YouTube currently. So if you go to that YouTube link and share it.
Of all the things that it's just the dumbest thing.
Miles being semi-serious. No, thank you. I'm thanking you guys. But yeah, you're live. Photos are good.
Going bad. Adam, how you doing? Too bad. Yeah. So I have I was already invited to speak. I gathered 1,000 ran out of here.
He said that earlier.
I have Facebook on my phone.
Right now.
Here's about structure until you need it. I live in a co-op. So.
It's about 4 questions.
Come on. So we can't ask those ones. You like those though? I like those.
Well, it reminds me when I did theater, but it's like even some of Michael's questions. It's just like I think of that Bill O'Reilly moment from like when he was doing his edition. He's like, "What does that mean? Play it out. What does that mean? Like, I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it." But no, I think I did at least 4 questions from everybody.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of overlap when you kind of dig underneath.
Yeah, and some of it with environmental questions, I realized like a 3-part question. So
So do you have a piece of paper to take down notes on these no form questions, or can I just?
I think everybody will find it fine.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah. So they live in my
Check.
Yeah, right. It's one of those. Hi, everyone. Hopefully.
Ladies and gentlemen, the debate will start in 10 minutes.
It's just dumb. I have my I had to pay for that. Oh yeah, you're over in the danger zone. I was right on the border of the danger zone. It's really fun when the cops come up to you, like, 6 in the evening.
On the corner of
So,
okay, that's exactly what I did. Yeah.
So what happens if they say you're
So
we're now into like
I had no idea. I was just like, if that happens for me on the 2nd floor of an apartment, that's not a good day.
Every
You can build an ark or something.
I'll go to the next. I'll start with the next person. That will start with you. Second, first question will go to Arnie.
Well, especially when they say should have flashed one more. Well, you're in the 2nd floor. Like, okay, so you know you're.
There is none, but yeah. I I
So you
guess I'll
two
just,
clear that
you know,
mic.
stand on my
Yeah.
counter or something.
You already got to share mic,
But
Yes.
it was annoying because I live I live on the corner of East Coast and Second, so I'm kind of right on the border.
Private property.
We're sharing.
But I work on Livingston and Willie Street here, so I was like
This
right.
only have to hit like somebody
You have a little, yeah, I mean,
It's great.
international radio, there should be a live stream.
I got my tickets to the thing on the 8th.
I think we should all sing our introduction.
I don't know, the hospital kind of feels like you need to you have to do your introduction. You actually, that's the fuse directly.
I had a staff meeting this weekend, and I was the MC at the game, so I actually put a question to us, who's the libertarian candidate for governor this year? And one of the people in the back's like, who cares? And my boss is like, shut up. So, my boss is a big lefty, but still.
The Wi-Fi password? Yeah. Get that thing going, then we can have Facebook
too close to the lake.
as well.
You understand your message is helpful for everybody. That's not about you. You're just the messenger.
Audio.
It's a good account.
Audio.
Say, yeah.
I'm working the gun show this weekend. Right in the front door. We're the only kind of second guys.
Audio test.
You're going to dinner with Friday, but we're going to the football game. So she's like, she wants everybody else there. It's like, oh, we can all do what's for your fans and that period of time. So you want to decide what you want to do. Yeah. She's never done this. Nobody's playing. Nobody's playing up to the world game, so I don't care less.
Right. Jefferson got a that's all.
That's taking
It's yeah, it's not like it's in this area. It's pretty bad.
People should start playing too, so it's
The Middleton one is there,
Oh, it is.
but it's more spaced out.
I said
1974. Do you know what that's?
And there's a lot more space between for Jefferson, you're kind of just packed into like
I've been to that one thing once or twice. Actually, ran into
reach out to all of our radio stations.
you show up.
So you'll be on the end. Bill
I
will do
didn't know that much about it.
Bill does introduction first. So the first question will be Bernie, the second question will start with the third. Well, there's more than 4 chairs.
A lot of weird stuff.
You and Nate will share this mic, Bernie and will share that. This mic is being transmitted to audio.
I just need a volunteer for some.
Yep.
Customs, there's this company.
Okay, and we are live.
I should have been out there already. Because she was a contractor. She said, just send me your credentials and that. So it's like $8 for like a full front plate.
You have your phone on you?
Oh, it is. You know, because she was like, but it's like, she's like, I think I could go with one of the metal ones. She had to, I'm like, what are you going to? She had to think for like 10 minutes and she was already going. I'm like, okay, now I'll throw their backpacks on there and start walking around for 5 miles and see what you are. You know, at $600 all of a sudden you'll feel, hey, this is a great place. It's worth it. I think it's called Angel Defense or something. I can't.
That is something I don't have.
We won't have play here.
I appreciate that. That's very sweet. So something like that when you go now.
I don't have a physique.
Next place is the ear, the whole ear, down in the hole.
So are you going to get to know that you're
It's called second attention. The third place, you don't want to put sunscreen on, but you want to get a chance to here. Because if you line up, you're going to have to do surgery on the piece of wood. Changes often that will fingers. The fourth place, most people don't think about is here. Now, you remember the Frito-Lay potato chip commercial? Everybody got just one. Skin cancer was that. This was some of the most it's so tight again.
That's why
You know, everywhere else,
and other people just like definitely. I never realized it. It's great. So weird.
I saw that she runs the, well, she ran the blood bank as Meritor for the one time. Now I never know exactly how to describe what she does. She runs.
So I heard a bunch of stuff. I ordered a bunch of where I stood. I ordered a shirt, and it was 3 items. They sent me 6 packages. 3 of them completely empty. I didn't pay for the shipping. What a waste.
I'm everyone's least favorite. But someone has to do
Is that why you came here, or you have someone kind of rooting for you?
Well, I actually was some of these guys the roof of the blister was screened at the bottom. I came on because get
Check.
Their answer is no, that's provider with the great
Check.
we have to certify.
Check.
Is that correct? That's all I've got. We've been left in the U.S. Oh, no,
Only the greatest band that has existed, section 1, 2.
Yes. I mean, that's recording this. That's recording live. I mean, I guess nobody has said anything about it. I haven't said anything. Don't say it. That's everything's recording.
Yeah, and when I'm up there, I'm not going to talk about what I did.
far as I'm concerned, if you're on the ballot, you should have an equal amount of time as anybody else, regardless of how much you poll or how much money you make. If you're on the ballot, you're just as legitimate as anyone else.
Unfortunately, Wisconsin Broadcasters Association.
I think obviously Michelle, she said she was coming to my Lions meeting. She's in my Lions. I know her pretty well. She was my senior.
Well, we got like a four.
Check, check.
And it was just a fluff answer.
Supreme Court.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will be starting shortly. We are currently live streaming on YouTube at Wisconsin International Radio. You go to YouTube, Wisconsin International Radio, and share that link. We are currently live streaming. Ignore I said anything. Keep talking.
It's a drill, it's a drill. General quarters, all hands.
Right underneath which guys the police.
Remember? We're definitely in favor of that.
Exactly. I have the
Remember to stay and do your accounts.
freedom-oriented sticker.
This is a drill, this is a drill. General quarters, all hands bend your bastards.
Phil, you were Army too, weren't you?
Yep, right.
You were, Michael, you were Army, right?
I did 5 Navy for 1 year because of.
Oh wow.
Special ones or anything. Yeah, it's just.
Michael White.
Oh, I heard
Green
about
Party.
it.
Phil is the Libertarian candidate. And Arnie, who was like about 3 feet tall.
Napster. Nice to see you.
No, and I mean, I was involved with radio and so forth. Starting off
Our basements are
with
still,
like a bunch of graduates.
it's stone basement, so it's not finished.
All their stuff was like shit before.
But it's, we got the humidifiers. So we good. My parents, but everybody ended up.
Just get out.
We got around the house and around, so that's all.
They're always interesting.
Now we got
You know,
professional thing, and then I'm doing this whole more like little right, it's kind of like I need
So after the grades and maybe this is not your last name.
Oh yeah.
I speak to
I call him the most existential. Oh yeah, no, I call him my unofficial uncle. I've been joking about that for years. Like, oh, it's my uncle from Diff, and he jokes about it too.
Well, at any rate, we highlighted this idea when the news was still around, and we were going to do this show cash out, which is basically like, what is Mozo like?
If we're not going to use the show.
Just kind of hang out with the friends and work, and just be having like the funniest conversation. So we were like trying to make this into a TV show.
I gotta introduce you to a guy named This guy is everything.
The whole first one. They were good. Nobody asked to leave. Exactly.
Basically a marshal.
All right, I'm getting rid of the first one.
Significant things.
And it just stayed on the page.
Oh yeah.
Y'all are not going to ask the questions we are, so it's actually okay to sit in the front row. It doesn't mean you're more likely to ask. We're the targets, so please come forward.
Don't call me.
Not wanting to.
No, that's, you need to set
That's
it
a
back
done.
down.
There you go.
So we're gonna share Randy and I, and you, and she'll have us. You look good in that purse.
Really does.
I
Wow, it's your color. Right.
It's under here someplace.
Why, that's my trick. Oh, yeah. And that one.
I don't have the right version.
Okay, no. That's why. Oh, yeah, it's true.
Really?
Feel free.
I gotta have something for you. You need to wear it.
I'll wear it to work every day. Yeah, I gotta get my.
You don't mind if I record your own personal? You log on your own Facebook?
Are you on?
All rights reserved. Any recording or flash photography is encouraged, as long as you share it on social media.
Share and tag.
I put up thick cameras.
She never showed it. She's like,
It's bad, so you have to take pictures.
she's always been.
Ignore everything I'm saying right now. Audio sync cameras 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just ignore me, please. We'll start in a few minutes.
Especially when I tell you. I'm a very camera shy person. I've never actually spoken in front of
We got extra seats in case Walker and Evers want to show up.
That's great.
They were invited.
Just get a picture, put them on the table.
Yeah.
I played Scott Walker in a street demonstration once.
All right.
Go for it.
Open for business.
Drew the short straw. Is that how it works?
Missing 2 candidates.
We paged them? We got a page. That was before he said, let's build a wall with Canada. Got some fresh material.
Third party special on aisle 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, he in a Republican debate, he was trying to like go toe to toe with Trump.
He's like, I'm gonna build a wall with Canada.
I need to build a wall with, well, now what you did. Keep all those damn lips out. It's a joke.
Platform plate number?
My phone only has 3 things, I can have one.
But if we build a wall with Canada, a lot of us are gonna get hurt climbing over it, trying to get out.
One of the funnier comments I heard in the 2016 cycle was Gary Johnson saying that he was watching the Olympics to see how high the Mexican pole vaulters could.
Ooh.
Yeah.
missed that.
Very clever. He wasn't clever the whole time.
Good days and bad days.
Exactly.
So we're gonna stay seated, so seated, so standing. You're too intimidating these days, you know, I just can't do it. Yeah, I wore my class today, too.
Yeah, I was offended.
But maybe not saying hi.
Yeah, that's what I'm
She's
hearing.
having second thought, she's gonna leave and just picking.
Persona.
I get it.
It's the persona.
Remember at Slaughter's Life in the casino, this guy held a t-shirt bag? I'm wearing my t-shirt again. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I do remember.
Yeah. Governor t-shirt.
You're not Governor Bush.
Governor t-shirt, I should do that, that's a good one. Thank you.
I haven't had a pretty big up in my shirt, so I'm gonna try and cover it on tongue for a while.
Really?
But my running mate's not too pleased when I don't have my shirt. Keep him happy, right? Am I right? See, he's wagging his finger at me. Gotta be.
You're the top of the ticket, Frank, come on.
Yeah.
You're gonna be outshined by your.
All right, everyone's phones off.
I'm sorry.
So I did my Wisconsin eye interview, you know, about halfway through the phone. Oh, because I got there and they said, yeah, you're like, it's 1 o'clock sometime. I got there about 1:45, and I was sitting there chatting. You know, you're ready to start early? Like, all right. And then I didn't even think. I got it in my pocket. Halfway through, this goes off. Yeah, and I totally unfazed. I said, that's all good. Kept on going.
Nice. Made it look like your phone's always going.
Had a point.
He never calls him.
Yeah. So I gotta take this.
Hold on, Steve.
You do.
Hold it right there.
You might have to take that call. Me, not so much.
That reminds me, I was watching one of the flood reports, Bob Lindmeyer, on email, and he was giving a report, and he was flipping through the days, talking about what was gonna happen with rainfall, and it was the wrong day that he was talking about, and he's like, he walks out of camera saying, I hate this, and he said crap, or something like that, and I'm like, Bob Lindmeyer, what did you just say? It was so funny. It was like,
He's a local weather guy?
yeah.
Forever.
He's 27. He's like, I hate this crap.
Something
Something
like,
like
they're always on. You know when you think they're not.
walking off camera saying that. Clicking this button that scrolls through the day.
I think Miles is ready.
All right. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Wisconsin International Radio, I'd like to welcome you to the first gubernatorial debate of the general election. My name is Miles Kristen. I will be tonight's moderator. Tonight we will hear from 4 of the 6 candidates on the ballot for governor of Wisconsin. They include Philip Anderson of the Libertarian Party, Arnie Enns of the Wisconsin Party, Independent candidate Maggie Turnbull, and Green Party candidate Michael White. Tonight's discussion will include a range of issues from the war on drugs, healthcare, and the Wisconsin university system. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions. Some questions will be answered by a show of hands. We will start off tonight with Philip Anderson first and a 2-minute introduction to each candidate, starting with Phil.
Thanks, Miles, and thanks to you and Wisconsin International Radio for sponsoring this event. Obviously, one of the reasons we're here tonight is because the entrenched powers that be, in the form of the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, doesn't think it's important for the public to allow those of us who are on the ballot in November to debate their candidates who happen to spend a ton of money on their constituents, meaning broadcast, television, and radio stations in the state. A definite conflict of interest, so appreciate the opportunity tonight to address that. My name is Phil Anderson. I'm a Libertarian candidate for governor. I'm from Beloit originally. I live in Fitchburg now, right outside of Madison. I've been in the Madison area for the last 30 years. I've worked in the taxi industry, I'm a real estate broker, I've got a bunch of other jobs as well. And I just got into politics in a serious way in 2014. I ran for state assembly, District 47, which is Monona, McFarland, the town of Madison, and Fitchburg. The reason I got involved is because I was constantly complaining about the government, and it didn't really matter whether a Democrat or Republican was in power. But the fact that government continued to grow and continued to infringe upon our rights and do things that weren't efficient and do things that I felt that as an individual citizen and the head of a family and somebody who belonged to a neighborhood and a local government could get done much better, much more efficiently, much more honestly and transparently at the local level. So when I was looking around for a home, the Libertarian Party appealed to me because Libertarians believe that we have the right to live our lives as we choose as long as we don't interfere with the rights of other people to do the same thing. That basic philosophy is what drives all of our opinions, all of our issue positions, and we'll cover some of those tonight. But I'm very passionate about that idea that one of the main pillars of our campaign, my campaign, is local control. We'll talk about some other issues, but local control means that at any time a decision can be made at a more local level than the state or federal government, it should be. Not only for moral reasons or reasons of personal liberty, but because those people that then make those decisions, people that live in neighborhoods, people that are belong to families, people that go to local city council meetings, county board meetings, and get involved in their school board, are the ones who deal with the consequences and pay the bills that those government programs do. And the higher up that funding goes for government programs, the more corruption there is, both Democrats and Republicans, the more misuse of authority, the more infringement on our rights as individuals to live our lives as we choose happens. And I'm totally against that. And I think that the way forward is to limit state government, to move things as locally as possible, and to remember that any government is with the consent of the governed. And if we don't consent, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on in Madison and Washington, D.C. that we don't consent to, that we never consented to, that we need to put up a fight. And that's where I stand on those issues, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. I'm Arnie Enns, and I'm running underneath a vehicle of my own kind of creation that I call the Wisconsin Party. And we got a great tagline, so you guys should consider to vote Wisconsin Blue, not just drink Wisconsin Blue. I know we're in Madison, the home of much of that, but yeah. So I'm running because I too, like Phil, got fed up with the system as I saw it, and my wife got tired of me just talking to her about it and said, why don't you go and do something about it? So I decided to get involved in our political process because it is fundamentally corrupted. And I looked around and I saw the Democrats and I saw the Republicans, and you see this kind of lack of choice that you really have. People keep on talking about the lesser of two evils, and I knew I didn't want to run as a Republican or a Democrat because to me they're part of the problem. And I looked around at some of the other parties, and they all have their pros and cons from what I saw. And what I wanted to do is have a voice for the unrepresented. So I thought that we'd do something and call it the Wisconsin Party. It's for the people that are disempowered, that are disillusioned, and that don't have a voice within our current system. Because, as most people know, about 50% of the people in the state of Wisconsin that are eligible to vote aren't going to vote this year. So what you have is around 26% versus 24%. One way or the other, it's going to decide who makes all the laws in our state, and who's going to interpret them, and who's going to be telling us what we have to do as a society. To me, that just seems so broken. And people will say, just get more people to vote within one of the two parties, but the reason a lot of people don't vote is because they don't really represent them. So we need what we're doing here today, I believe, very, very much in our society. We need more choices. We need to go away from a two-party system to a multi-party system. And we'll talk about a lot of these reforms that we all think we should do, and there's a lot of agreement amongst the four of us up here around those things like ranked choice voting, or other kinds of mechanisms, or parliamentary representation, or multiple representation from across the district based upon voting percentages. There's a lot of ways we can do a better job of representing what the population wants, because that's what democracy is supposed to be about, right? Word of democracy, demos, is people. But our system doesn't represent the people of the state of Wisconsin. It represents a small minority and special interest groups. And what I'm trying to do, and I agree with a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight, is we share those, but I want to go full force at it. I want to talk about the things that are broken that we have to fix before we can talk about the really hard problems in our society, which has to do with long-term sustainability. So anyways, we'll get into more of that. Miles says I'm out of time here, so I'm going to pass the mic down to Maggie. Thanks. Or we're swapping mics.
Thanks, Arnie. Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie Turnbull. I'm an independent, and I'm running as an independent because I also feel that the two-party system is not serving us anymore. I am born and raised Wisconsinite. I was born in West Dallas, Wisconsin. Most of my family still lives in the Milwaukee area, and I ended up living with my parents in northern Wisconsin, in Antigo. My dad was fortunate enough to take part in a National Health Service program where people who wanted to go to medical school and wanted to serve areas that are less affluent and do not have easy access to quality health care, they could go to medical school and that would be paid for in exchange for going into an underserved area. And my dad no way could have afforded to go to medical school otherwise, but because this program existed and because he was so committed to serving people, he did that. And when I was 12, we moved to Antigo, Wisconsin, up north. I graduated high school there, went to UW-Madison for college, majored in astronomy and physics, went to graduate school at University of Arizona, did a PhD minor in biology and my major in astronomy. And I've been working as an astrophysicist and astrobiologist ever since, running NASA teams all over the country. But I decided after getting the job that you're supposed to get, and I was in Washington, D.C., that there is nowhere else in this nation that I wanted to live for the rest of my life than Wisconsin, my home. And so I took my career off grid and decided I would do whatever needed to be done in order for me to work here and connect with people here and be close to my family and stop the brain drain that we do see, especially in rural communities where it's a great quiet place to grow up, but then you never come back because there aren't local jobs, there isn't really a vibrant economy there for people to come back to. And I was rebelling against that internally, and I wanted to demonstrate that you can come back, and if there's any way to do it, you should try it. But this election season, I too was looking at the political situation in Wisconsin and how just how contentious it's become and how divided we've become as people. And was that my signal that I need to stop talking? Oh. Yeah. And I feel that does not jive with my experience as a Wisconsinite. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're stranded on the side of the road with a flat tire, somebody's gonna stop and help you. And that person could be somebody that you will, if you didn't know that or have that personal interaction, you could sort of philosophically hate because they're on the other side of this divide politically. But as people, as humans, we have so much in common with each other, and Wisconsin is, in my experience, a very reasonable place where people do work together at the local level to solve problems together, kind of regardless of what's happening with these political disputes. So I wanted to stand up for the middle ground. I wanted to highlight the fact that we aren't really divided into camps like this, but that it's a political system that does that to us. And it's not the people, it's the system. The system is what really needs to change because that's what's driving us to act not in our own best interest. So that's what I'm here to try to help change, and ranked choice voting is a key part of that, as well as getting more independents and third-party candidates on the ballot. So I'll stop there and pass the baton.
I'm up with a camera up here so we can see ourselves.
Oh, that's useful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And Maggie, I like your dad. I'd like to meet him. I'm Michael White. I'm the Green Party candidate for governor. I'm not from Wisconsin, but I picked Wisconsin as a place to live about 13 years ago. I'm retired military. I served 5 years in the Navy, 15 years in the Air Force. I've lived in 10 states, 2 foreign countries. I served at sea. I served overseas. I commanded a hospital. I'm a gun owner. But I became disillusioned with our political system. When did the party of Lincoln become the party of build a wall at the border? When did the party of FDR get bought and paid for by Wall Street? When did corporate money, and in particular drug companies, become overwhelmingly powerful that nobody was willing to stand up for them? So like everybody else at the table, I became disillusioned with the major parties. And I went out and did a geek thing. My son works for Red Hat. And I started researching things on the internet, and I found the Green Party back in 2010. And then in 2012, I reached out and supported Jill Stein. And unfortunately, she's now a friend, and I've had my arm twisted more than once to do things. And I've been involved with the Green Party ever since, because we have threats that are existential, that threaten my children's future, that threaten your children and your grandchildren. I'll start with climate change, but there's a whole lot of other things. We're turning into an oligarchy. We're turning into a country run by corporate interests and special money. And the people sitting in this table have certain things in common. We're all standing up for the people and standing against corporate money, standing against the privileged and the special running everything for us. We're all standing together on that with common issues. There's things we're going to disagree on, but to quote John McCain, there's a lot more that we share than differ. So my reason for running this year is I've been saying I wanted to do things for a long time. I'm no longer in the military, so I can stand up and do things and say things. So I picked the Green Party as a vehicle. People encouraged me to do that, and I took the plunge. I'm here to work on the issues of climate change, on getting corporate money out of politics, on voter integrity, on ranked choice voting, and also on health care, because I see my patients crying every week because they can't afford medicines that we use. A very common medicine which is taking over medicine are the biologics. The cost of the biologics are 50% more than the average annual income where I live. We need to fix it. I'm done.
Okay. And I will raise this highlighter when people go over 2 minutes. My first question will be to Arnie Enns. Many Wisconsinites believe that healthcare costs are raising far too fast. As governor, what would you do to address the cost of healthcare in Wisconsin?
Right, so healthcare is this big, complicated thing, but there's things that you can do in the short term within the economic and government system that we have. You can take the money from the federal government in order to help fund care within the state of Wisconsin. So that's the first thing that we should do. Scott Walker did not do that, but that will give a large number of Wisconsin citizens access to health care that they do not have today. But that's stuff that I think all of us are going to agree on. And to really fundamentally address health care, it's a big issue within the whole country. We have to fundamentally reevaluate how it works. We use 17% of our GDP on healthcare, which is twice the average of the rest of Western nations that are very similar to the United States. And people say that's great, that's working well, but it's not. That's fundamentally broken. I don't care who you are, if you're spending twice as much as the next country and they're getting better results, that's incompetence and that shouldn't be rewarded. So it's hard to do at the state level, but there are things that you would be able to do within the state of Wisconsin. And it's not just treating healthcare, part of it is a cultural thing as well. We have to stop thinking about taking a pill to fix anything that's wrong with you. We also have personal accountability. And as a governor, I'd like to use that as a platform to talk more about these things and to change the way we even look at medicine, in that we can be much more preventative than treatment-based. Treatment-based locks people into long-term medical health care, and that's what corporations want. They want customers to keep coming back to them. They don't want customers that they cure, and then, well, they don't need my services anymore, they don't need my medicine anymore. You want a captured market, that's how you make money. And our system is built to incentivize maximizing shareholder value. So, but there's a lot we can do ourselves as well. I, for one, I've gone vegan. I think there's a lot of things that we eat ourselves that cause a lot of problems in our systems. I'm not preaching to anybody, but there's a lot of things you can do with eating whole food, problems that we have with our health. Miles tells me I'm done, so I'm going to pass it down to Megan. Oh, damn it all, it's twice.
I was holding a quarter of short on you, so you can't
Stopping short.
Thanks. Right, so I think that, you know, there are going to be some common themes probably running through our answers here, but I think that we need to get off the ideological pedestal and indeed use the federal funds that are available to support public health care. I would like to see eventually Badger care available, at least at a very basic level, for all Badgers, so that it's not an issue for people to be able to go in for an annual checkup. And I would like to see vision and dental be a part of that as basic primary care. I've been an independent contractor now since moving back to Wisconsin. There aren't a lot of employers for astrobiologists in Wisconsin, so I had to take my career off grid. But the trade-off there is that I am self-employed. So when I think about how to provide for myself for healthcare, I'm looking at, you know, buying it by myself. And I've had no end of frustration over the last 10 years, you know, trying to figure out how to be covered at least at a basic level and still have it affordable. So I currently pay like $350 a month for what amounts to being emergency only care and a very high deductible. I don't think that's acceptable. I think that it will save us a lot of money in the long run to have Badger care available to every person in Wisconsin for at least primary care, just basic care, and then an option to buy in for more. I think that it's not realistic to say that we're going to have a publicly funded universal healthcare system for everybody, no matter what their needs are. I think we do need a hybrid of private industry, private sector insurance options, as well as a safety net and a basic care program for people who really need it. And that this will save us money in the long run, but we're going to have to work with private sector as well in order to figure out, you know, the absolute best way to do it. But certainly we should be taking the federal dollars that are available for us.
Answering the same question, I think the first place that I would start is drug costs, because I have seen the cost of generic medicines that I prescribe for my patients go up 20-fold in a 4-month period. So a $9 tube of a simple steroid that I use on a regular basis in September 2014, the cost to the pharmacy that I work with in December the same year, $175. So the drug companies are getting away with extortion, and there's no other way to put it. I understand the profit motive for developing new drugs, but there's a number of resources that we can point to which also make it clear that their profit margins are horrendous, and that a lot of the things that they're passing off as research are in fact marketing studies and not actual resources. After that, I think I'm in complete agreement with Maggie that the number one issue is we don't do a good job of providing basic health care universally. We don't have good access, particularly for our Native Americans, particularly for our geographically remote areas, particularly for our socioeconomically underserved. We've not taken money that we should take from the government to do it. I can also understand the other argument is that when you take that money, you get driven by the government, and I've seen a variety of problems with that. I'm not sure that I know all the right answers. I do know that our current system is not working. We have a life expectancy which is no better than a lot of other places. We have infant mortality rates that are actually worse than other places. Cuba has about the same population as New York City. Cuba has lost about 3,000 people to HIV. New York City lost 70,000. And they spent a lot less money in Cuba in taking care of that epidemic. So there's other approaches out there. I would not be prescriptive, and I'm out of time. I'll defer for now.
Thanks. In response to this question, I'd like to point out that in our introductions, we all talked about government corruption and the problems with the government being involved in things. And I think that's especially true in healthcare. I'm probably the one candidate for governor
at least the ones that are here, that would not accept the federal Medicaid expansion. And let me tell you why. It's actually what Dr. White referred to. Anytime there's money coming from the federal government or the state government for almost anything, there are strings attached to it. And that the same is true with healthcare funds. One of the things we need to remember is that healthcare and health insurance aren't the same thing. And they get conflated a lot in public discussions about it, and people, like one of the things that drives the high price of medications is that insurance companies are involved, and big pharma's involved, and they mandate those prices, and they get involved with politicians at the state and federal level, and so we're stuck with these programs that don't serve people. What I would endeavor to do as your governor is to separate the idea of insurance and healthcare. I personally belong to a concierge service, which is a primary healthcare service for which you pay a certain subscription fee every month. And what I get for that, it's less than $100 what I'm paying for myself as a single person. What I get is all my basic care, exams, visits, emails from my doctor, phone calls, whatever. And then I carry health insurance to cover emergencies. This sounds like a very similar thing to other kinds of insurance, like car insurance, for example. So to help you along with this analogy, think if you had to gas up your car, and get oil changes and basic maintenance for your vehicle, and every time you did, you had to go through your insurance because the government had trained us to believe that they were the same thing. Car insurance and car maintenance were the same thing. And you had to have a recommended people to go to, that there was all this paperwork to fill out, that they chose which gas stations were going to exist and which didn't. That would be incredibly inefficient and very expensive. And I think that's what we have right now in the healthcare system. And mainly it's because health insurers spend a lot of money on politicians. So anytime the government is involved with anything, but especially this, they're going to mandate policies that pick winners and losers, and the insurance companies are going to make sure that they're involved in every step of the process and profiting every step of the way. So I don't think the answer is more government involvement. We all want the same thing. We want available, inexpensive health care for everybody. But the way to get there is not the government. They've demonstrated that they're especially bad and corrupt at that.
Our next question, we will start with Maggie. What do you see as the biggest issue facing the people of Wisconsin, and how would you propose to address it?
The biggest issue I see facing us in Wisconsin is our election system. I believe that actually moving from a single checkbox ballot to a ranked choice voting system would solve a lot of our problems overnight. Because right now we are really, really stuck in a stranglehold between two parties that in the best case scenario, we're holding our nose and voting for the lesser evil. And neither of them is responsive to us. Neither of them is accessible. Neither of them in this state is really representing the true diversity of viewpoints that is present in the state. And if the simple solution to that really is just to move to ranked choice voting. And that is something that where you just rank the candidates. And a very brief explanation is that if your first choice does not get a majority of the votes, your vote will go to your second choice until someone has won a majority of the votes. And the result is that the majority of voters walk away from the election feeling like they got either their first or their second choice. And it also enables more independents and third-party candidates to participate meaningfully, because then you can vote for your Bernie without feeling like a vote for Bernie is, a vote for Trump. You can vote for Bernie and have your second safe choice be Hillary, and if Bernie doesn't win, well, your vote will still go to Hillary. It's a system that actually builds consensus amongst voters and leaves people walking away feeling more peaceful about the whole process. And I think actually can inspire people to think about, how am I going to fill out my ballot? Kind of like filling out the March Madness bracket, like I get to rank all these candidates. So what am I going to do? So that I actually think is the number one issue, that if I had a legacy as governor and that was the only thing we accomplished, it would be a very long-lasting positive legacy.
I really like her description, explanation of that, because I've been struggling to explain ranked choice voting to people for a long time, and I totally support ranked choice voting, and I absolutely want to steal your explanation because it's great. So there's a lot of smart people at the table. I like going last, so I hear the other answers first. But my number one issue is climate change and environmental destruction, and I'm going to link those two together. And the reason I'm going to say that number one, even though it's a global issue and a national issue, is that if we wait for the national government to start doing something about it, you may as well kiss off your kids' future. We are running out of time. There is no planet B. We don't have a second choice. The best scenarios, the most optimistic scenarios currently out there say that the Southwest is going to become a desert where agriculture can't be supported and there's not enough water, that a third of the world's population is going to lose its access to fresh water, that we're going to see most of our coastal cities underwater or at least having clear sky, flooding every day of the week before the end of the century. We don't know where the tipping point is where we can't recover, but we're moving there a lot faster than people predicted, and it's going to get more expensive the longer we wait. So as governor, what would I do about it? I would work with the other states that are already adapting the goals of the Paris Climate Accords. I would work cooperatively with state and local governments because there's things we can do at the local level, and I would lead the way by example. And I'm done.
Well, those are excellent answers, but I just want to ask Maggie one question. Are we sure there's not a planet B? You're the one that would know, right?
There's no planet B.
Okay, thank you. Just making sure we check with the expert. Both very, very important issues, but for me, as your governor, the thing that we need to fight for the most is the thing that's having the most effect on our state initially and right now. And I think it's the one that can get done because both Democrats and Republicans are leaving this issue behind in its totality and its effect on people, and that is criminal justice reform. There's a tremendous, Wisconsin ranks second in the country in the number of African Americans incarcerated. Second in the country. And why is that? Because we are still suffering under the war on drugs. And I'm not talking about, people should be free to smoke it. Of course they should. 61%, the recent Marquette poll, agree that recreational should be legal. But think about all the other things that leads to. If we stop the racist war on drugs, we'll stop putting people in jail for a crime that has no victim. We're taking that business that exists, we all know it exists, and making it legal. So we're no longer enriching criminals for something that we should be free to use. And following legalizing marijuana, we need to get rid of mandatory minimum sentencing so that judges can do the right thing. We need to understand that we have the right to jury nullification. Raise your hand if you know what jury nullification is. A few. It's the right for a jury to find somebody not guilty, not because they didn't commit the crime, but because the law was immoral. And constitutionally that's legitimate, but currently the state Supreme Court stands in the way of that being implemented. As governor, I'll convene as I can for people that are in jail for non-crimes. And following that, we'll expunge people's records so they can go back to not only their families, but back to work. And last of all, the thing that doesn't get mentioned about this problem enough is voting rights. The idea that people, not only on paper after they get out of jail for a felony or whatever, but people in jail should be allowed to vote. Why? Unless they committed voter fraud, which is pretty rare, obviously. We all agree it's pretty rare. Why would they have the right to vote? They're not represented. So what happens to people, particularly in Milwaukee, some in Madison, some other places, is people get convicted of a crime that shouldn't be a crime. They go to jail, they're separated from their families, everybody gets desperate, families are broken up. This burden of raising kids and dealing with disciplinary issues goes to the schools, so there's more expense there. Law enforcement is in more danger because they're trying to prosecute crimes that should be crimes in the first place and that are racially motivated. All of these costs can be recovered, and we can have a much cheaper, a much more just state government if we just start down that process. And begins with legalizing marijuana, but it's not just about that, it's about all the other things as well. And we can get that done without the others. The other parties, not the other candidates.
Sorry. Thanks for that clarification.
You guys are all in, right?
I'm all in. So, running for governor, what's the most important thing that you think we face as the state of Wisconsin? These guys pretty much nailed it, right? And if you have to pick one thing for me, it's our ecological crisis that we're facing and our lack of sustainability as a society. But we can't fix that until we fix the problem that Maggie's talking about. We don't have a government that represents us. Government writes the rules of our society, right? And we then enforce those, and that leads to the system that we have. If you want to fix a corrupted system, you have to fix the rules on how we do our representation and get the corruption and the money out of politics and out of our government. On my website, that's the first thing that I have. It's to take back our government. And the second thing is leave it better than you found it. So I'm kind of cheating by making this two things. It's 1A and 1B. And we have to take back our government so we can fix the fundamental issues around sustainability, right? We in this country have about under 5% of the world's population. We use 30% of the world's resources. It's completely unsustainable. We have this model of constant growth. So we're going to talk a little bit of economics. People hate economics because it's boring as all get out, but our economic system is broken. People put a lot of faith into capitalism and markets to solve the problems, and this is where Phil and I will disagree, because he's going to think that's a good way to go. Government's broke too, don't get me wrong, but the way our system is set up to maximize shareholder value, to extract as much as you can from every exchange, leads to greed taking hold, and greed means that we consume more than we need. Gandhi had a great quote, and it was like, the earth has enough to take care of all of we should say humankind's, not mankind's, needs, but not all of its wants. But we, being the materialistic society that we are, we keep wanting more and more and more, and it's like feeding a beast that never feels satiated. And we have to stop that. It's not just government, this is a societal change, right? Government reflects society. We have to change our society. So running for governor, I want to use it as a platform to talk about zero GDP growth, ecological economics, shrinking our government, having less in our lives every day, because that's the only way we're going to get to a sustainable world. So if you're one of those 3 out of 4 people that think that our environment and our ecology and our biosphere are really important to you, stop being a hypocrite. And we're all hypocrites. I'm the first one to say I'm a hypocrite. I spend and I use more than I need. But we have to, as a society, step back. That's all I got.
Okay, now a multi-part question on environmental issues. And we'll start with Mr. White. What do you see as the issues facing the Great Lakes? And as governor, how would you address climate change?
I love it when people ask really good questions, and I hate it when I'm limited to 2 minutes. So I do want to take a side tour real quick. Have you noticed how exceptional today is? We have candidates that are actually answering the questions and taking tough questions, and people that are carefully listening, as opposed to the paddling. And this is
I'll extend your time on that.
And this is all Miles' fault, so I want to give him credit. But number one, as governor, your ability to control things is somewhat limited. Your ability is more of persuasion and setting an example. So the first thing that I would do addressing Great Lakes is I would make sure that I adhere to existing commitments to safeguard the Great Lakes. I would put science back in the DNR so that we have data-driven decisions. The next thing I would do is I would, as I said earlier, I would work with other state governments, with local and city and county governments, and I would put the planet, people, and I'm sorry I'm stealing from Mike, planet, people, and principle first, and profit and special interests dead last. I am also a capitalist, but I don't mean it the same way that everybody means it when they make it a dirty word. I also believe in free enterprise, but free enterprise creates short-term answers. I call those Pruitts. A Pruitt is a short-term decision that profits or gives advantage to a group or a business without thinking about long-term consequences. And our history is rife with disasters where short-term decisions were made for the benefit of a few that many people wind up paying for later. I think I'm almost out of time, but there is no planet B, there is no second chance, so I would work every opportunity to fix those things that are controlled at the state level and work with other state governments to address those issues consistently, fairly, and transparently. And I'll pass.
Thank you. So I think one of the misconceptions that people have about libertarians is we want smaller government or less government in every way, shape, or form, and that it would be some sort of free-for-all. This is a case where it's not exactly true. If you believe, as I do, and other libertarians do, you have a very strong
sense that government should be involved in property rights and representing people's property rights. So when we all spoke at Kashina, and there's an issue with the Menominee River and a mine that's opening up on the Michigan side, and what should be done about that, the other candidates that were there, I don't remember what your answers were on this, but the answer to me was not, I mean, even over the wishes of local counties and passing resolutions, that the state should have stepped in and represented the property rights of not only the Indian tribes, but those counties and all the people that would be affected. We have an interest, we have a direct interest, not only in our own property, but the property that we share. And famously, John Locke came up with this idea. I hope I'm not getting too educational about this, but it's called Locke's Proviso. And I'll tell you how it affects how I'll govern as your governor. Locke's Proviso says that people can homestead natural resources, etc., as long as there is as much or as good for everyone else. Now, when Locke wrote that in the 1700s, the world was wide and there were very few people on it relative to now. But now, there's almost nowhere on the earth that you can go and do something and leave it as good or as much for somebody else. So a proper role of government, in any situation where there's pollution, in the Foxconn situation, in any situation where somebody is taking advantage of government, getting special permission to pollute or to abuse the land or the atmosphere, they should be held to account for that. And the proper role of the state, and the state's judicial system and executive branch, is to hold those people to account and not give them permits in the first place. One of the things that Governor Walker did was revoke this idea that in order for somebody to get a mining permit, or a company to get a mining permit, that they had to have demonstrated 10 years of similar mining some other state. So it demonstrated that they acted in good faith. He got rid of that. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to look at. Why would we let somebody open up a mine or a cattle, whatever, and I'm out of time. Why would we let them do that if we know that they've got a history of doing that? And the reason that it happens is because, number one, government doesn't stand for property rights, and number two, government is bought and paid for generally. So that's how those things happen.
Thanks, Phil. We're going to have a conversation one of these days around natural law, property rights, John Locke, and the like.
I don't think you like that conversation.
It's fascinating stuff. I'm serious. If you guys don't mind on that,
it's beautiful.
It's awesome stuff. But it's those first order kind of principles that our government and our economic systems have been evolved from. It's actually like the Scottish Enlightenment going back about 300 years. Awesome stuff. We should have more conversations like that in public. But the question wasn't about that. And I know you applied it within the Great Lakes. What can you do to protect our water systems? What can you do to protect the Great Lakes? And what would you do as governor? It's difficult stuff because there's all these systems in place, and you're right, Dr. White, that we as governors don't have as much power as what people might think you have if we were to hold that office. Power really resides in the people and the systems and the laws, and it requires the legislative branch to change those. But in general, there's principles that we should follow, that we should try to lobby for within the government, make sure that the legislative branches also follow the will that we're looking to lead on. And to me, with the Great Lakes, it's stuff around sustainability again. It's absolutely ridiculous that you have Enbridge pipeline that goes underneath the Mackinac Straits that is pumping tar sands out of Canada, and if that thing ever ruptures, you're talking about ruining one of the greatest natural resources in the world, the Great Lakes, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have pipelines, because it's a part of the world that we've built and that we live in. What we have to do is to minimize the risk associated with them. So we should look at stuff from an insurance perspective and say, let's do something else. Let's make sure we're not going to contaminate our greatest resources that we have. And we should take things like that and route them away from the water sources if at all possible. And a secondary thing then too, I just saw this in the news, I think it was last night, late, when I was being stupid and up too late looking at things that keep me up at night. And it was about algae bloom in Lake Superior is happening right now. And it doesn't usually have a problem with that. And that's an impact that we're having. People, if you're familiar with what's going on in Florida, my wife's grandmother lives down in Florida, and she's got respiratory problems from toxic neurotoxins from the pollution happening down there. Waterways in Lake Winnebago, it's just nasty. That's because of what we do to it. We let fertilizer run off, and we let CAFO byproducts run off. It contaminates our whole environment. So as governor, yeah, we got to protect our water. We got to protect our natural resources. I went over it. All right, more to come later.
Well, I think that the couple of things that I see that are threatening the Great Lakes ecology the most. And the Great Lakes are supporting a $60 billion economy that is directly tied to the health of the Great Lakes system. But one, invasive species, and two, nutrient load because of runoff. So we need to really throw a lot at protecting the Great Lakes from invasive species. The Asian silver carp is inching its way ever closer. And this is one reason why we need a governor in place who is actively going to advocate for protecting these waterways. We cannot have a governor who will not even talk about climate change or does not value science or understand the scientific language that is in place so that we can understand these systems and then create policies that are appropriate for them. And this isn't just because we like looking at nice lakes. It's because we have, many people's lives are dependent on the health of these ecosystems. And we have tourism, we have industry, we have fishing. Fishing by itself is a $10 billion industry. And when invasive species come into these lakes, those species that are fished are threatened directly. So having a governor in place who is actively going to work with the other stakeholders in the Great Lakes system and the bordering states, and we have two provinces in Canada that border the Great Lakes as well, and to actively lobby the federal government to support the restoration and the preventative measures. Because once you have an invasive species in a lake, you will never get it out again. And the introduction of Asian carp into the lakes will be devastating to us. So that is something in the very near term that we have to get on and make sure Washington is supporting as well, which it has threatened not to support. So I will just say, basically we need a governor in place who's really gonna fight for that.
Okay, we're gonna take 2 more questions and then we will take a 5-minute intermission. Next question, we'll start with Philip Anderson, and this will be a 3-part question. As governor, how would you address K through 12 education, our university system, and student debt?
All in 2 minutes?
2 minutes each.
Wow. Well, I just want to talk specifically about K-12. I think, working backwards a little bit, student debt is a problem where the government allows people to borrow money and supports the borrowing of money, which if you look at the graphs of how tuition has gone up, tuition goes up just as fast as people can borrow money or they're given money for schools. So what we need to do is stop doing that because it encourages people to get into debt, and the large debt load creates tons of problems for people after they graduate if they're able to find employment to pay it back. It's basically a way to get people into debt slavery, which is immoral and is not the business of the government. K through 12. I'll leave the university system for last if I happen to have time. We need a radical change in our public education. Specifically, we know that outcomes, the racial disparity in outcomes with African Americans in our school system is about the worst in the nation. And when changes are proposed to the public school system, often we hear, specifically from the teachers union and other lobbies, is that we support good public schools. Well, I support good schools. If a public school isn't doing its job, then why should people be trapped into paying taxes for it and then having to go there, especially those among us who don't have the resources to opt out? We're releasing a proposal in the next couple of days called Universal Open Enrollment. And what that will help people do is everyone has a dollar amount. Every student has a dollar amount associated with them that currently is used for open enrollment. And they can take that money, in the case of my kids, we're in the Verona district, and we considered open enrolling into West. And there's a dollar amount, I think it was like $1,800 or something. Those students take that money, or the district exchanges hands with that money if your kid goes to another school system. But this is money that people have paid for their education. And who knows better than parents the most appropriate way to educate their kids? And who is most vulnerable when the school systems don't work? Is generally in urban districts or people that don't have the option to move elsewhere. We see this especially in Milwaukee public schools, where there's basically a captive audience that is very poorly served. So our plan will enable people to opt out and create a situation where if there's a more appropriate school for your child, you can choose it because that's your money. The government didn't just print that and give it to the schools to pay for your kids' education. You've been taxed that money. People who pay property taxes pay it directly. People who rent pay that through their landlord. And the idea that the government knows better, or the teachers union, or whoever knows better how to educate your child is wrong, first of all. But secondly, they've been doing a terrible job, especially for those who are most vulnerable. So we need to let people make choices with the money that they paid in and break free from the stranglehold that the idea that only public education is good and the influence that special interest group has over our politics. And that specifically applies to the two candidates who are not here. Our schools are a mess in many places because we have a governor that doesn't do the right thing, and we have a head of the DPI who doesn't do the right thing either. And now they're patting each other on the back a few months ago about what a good job they're doing, and now they're both claiming to be the next education governor. That is preposterous. I laugh every time I hear it. It's ridiculous. But they're fooling people, so I'm glad we're talking about this because we shouldn't be fooled any longer.
I'll allow each candidate to take 3 minutes for this question.
Excellent.
How long did I take?
That's okay.
It's a longer question.
I mean, I could, everybody could talk 10 minutes about basically each one of these, but in the interest of keeping our audience engaged, we'll keep it a little bit shorter. So it's the K-12 system, UW system, as well as student debt, right? So that's a lot to chew on and a lot for us to think about. But I'm a bit different, and I like saying radical. People think being radical is a bad thing, but radical actually, in ancient Greek. And the root word of it all means to go to the root of things, right? So I want to go to the root of this problem. We can't differentiate it like we're talking about in the form of that question. Our educational system doesn't serve our needs right now. It's evolved through centuries to serve the needs of a certain system that's been built. We should reevaluate that. So I said this in my Wisconsin interview, and I'll say it here again. We need to establish, I believe, a Blue Ribbon Commission, look at our total education system from the ground up and say, what do we want the citizens of Wisconsin to be like? And to me, it's not just a K through 12 or through a UW system program. It's a lifelong thing. It's from the day you're born to the day you die. How should we treat education in our society? Because we're operating underneath the paradigm that we've been given through time, and I think it's failing us massively in a lot of different ways. We put out robots, we don't put out critical thinkers. We put out people that take good tests, but they can't create new initiatives for themselves. And it's not a total cover everything statement, because there's, of course, people that excel through the current system, but they excel in spite of it, not because of it. So we have to look at the whole world around us, see what we do in other cultures, and how their educational systems work, and what we can best take to serve the needs of Wisconsin. And again, we have to do this within that ecological paradigm that I was talking about in the last question, and that we have to do it in a way that's sustainable. We have to teach people around different ways of looking at economics and sustainability and things like permaculture concepts, which are things that we have to live in concert with the world around us much more. And so this whole thing of K through 12, the UW systems, and even debt, I mean, geez, don't get me started on debt and money and monetary policy. That's just a scam too. And within the system and the way you ask that question about student debt, because people feel it in the world we live in today, but it's broken, and what we do is money inflates the whole system, and we go into debt peonage, and then we're trapped for life, and then you have to follow along with the arc that you're told you have to live your life by. Go to school, take on debt, get a good job, pay it off, buy a big house. Get up, go to work, come home, go to bed. Get up, go to work, come home, go to bed. Great Blue Hill song, by the way. And we got to wake up to those kinds of things, right? And we have to ask ourselves fundamentally different questions about what we want to be as a society. And then it starts with education. It's what kind of population do you want? Do you want people that are going to work on an assembly line, follow orders, and not question things? Or do you want people to be able to express themselves in their natural being and see the magic in life and to see the interconnections in things? I prefer the latter. I think I have a very high opinion of humanity, usually. Depends on traffic. But we really could do much better than what we do for our educational systems and for our children. Anyways, I went over. Sorry, Miles.
So short of burning the whole thing down and starting over, I think which we will have to do if we don't make some pretty aggressive changes. But I think that I am in favor of diversity of options and in education at all grade levels. And I think that there's a lot that we could get into. For example, the voucher system and how in some instances it's completely outrageous the amount of money per student that is being taken out of the public school system and put into private schools, and that this is causing the demise of our public school system and propping up private education. But on the other hand, there are parts of this state, Milwaukee and Racine area, where that voucher system is the only thing that is that's keeping students learning right now. Like there are communities where we cannot just yank that rug out from underneath people. They are depending on this for the safety of their children and to have any hope of learning and doing well. So I would completely reevaluate that system, but I would be protective of it in certain areas where it's really critical. But one thing that I'd like to see in the K-12 system is more exploration-based learning. So the No Child Left Inside movement. This is an area where we can combine our environmental concerns and our need for environmental education and a connection with nature and all of the health benefits that come with that, mental health and physical health benefits that come with that, with an excellent science, really developing our children in their ability to think scientifically about things and use their natural sort of native internal tendency and desire to explore and observe and design their own and play with nature in order to learn. So incorporating more outdoor-based education into even cross-disciplinary, but especially in the sciences for K-12 is something that I would really like to see, and I think it would pay off for us in terms of environmental awareness as well. At the college, UW, at the college level, UW has an amazing system, a really lovely system. So I'm an educator too. I'm not just a scientist. I've taught at all of the grade levels at least a couple of times, and I taught for years in the Wisconsin technical system, and I've taught in the UW system as well in college. And I love the fact that we have all these different kinds of options for people, because not everybody's bound for a 4-year program, but there are a lot of different options. And I want to expand, look at controlling costs by seeing what we can do with today's technology for remote learning, and offering, if we end up with a college system where the different universities do specialize in certain areas, letting students get breadth by participating remotely in more than one college when they go to school. And hopefully that can help support a larger student body without driving up the costs. Now I will pass it to John.
When I win the election, I want all three of you to come work with me and work for me. Number two, I would vote for any one of these three ahead of either of the two people running because they have substantive answers. And I don't agree with all of them. I think there's areas we disagree, but they've all got ideas that I haven't thought about. All right? So, number one, student debt. When I went through college, I took out national defense student loans and I had scholarships, and my mom went into Hawk, but nothing like I had to go into Hawk to put my own kids through school. By the way, I could have had my loans forgiven because I served in the Navy, but I paid back every time. The Navy paid for med school, and then I served 5 years in the Navy. My kids don't have those kinds of options. 12 years after graduating, up to 30% of loans are in default. That's a problem for the people that are holding the loans, which needs to be addressed, but that whole system is broken and needs to be fixed. I have a number of ideas that I would talk about, but we don't have time to go into those in detail. Dealing with vouchers and K through 12, one of the problems is that not all schools have the same resources. So that in rural districts in particular, where people are land poor and are land rich and money poor, they don't have the money to raise the tax base to improve the school. And vouchers and open enrollment's not going to help that because they can't get the kids to those other schools. I think that's also true in a lot of inner city schools. But some of those solutions can make a difference. The point of the school system is to give everybody an even chance in life, in opportunities, and we are failing. So I like the Blue Ribbon Commission idea. I like some of the other ideas, and I think some mix of those is important. Fixing the university system, I'd get the university people to start telling me what's working, what's not working, as well as the people who've graduated, as well as the businesses, because I don't have all the answers. And I'm going to be brief on this whole thing because I haven't thought about some of this as much as they have, because I've been focusing on other issues. And I would go out, you know how to tell a really smart man? He finds a smarter woman that has the answers and goes and asks for help. And that's what I would do.
That's a good answer.
That was actually 2 minutes and 25 seconds.
Just bringing the average back to 3, actually. Still low.
Last question before we take a 5-minute break, and this is actually more of your opinion. We're going to start with Arnie. Tony Evers has stated frustration with the fact that Scott Walker is refusing to give him more than 2 debates. However, when Tony Evers was asked if the candidates on this stage should be allowed into the general debate, he refused to answer the question. What do you think of Tony Evers not having interest in discussing these issues with the 3rd and 4th party candidates, starting with Arnie?
Excellent, and I'd like to thank you, Miles, as well. I saw that short YouTube video where you found Tony Evers and asked him directly after his first press conference if he was interested and if he would do a debate with 3rd party candidates. And I believe his answer was along the lines of, I'm not prepared to answer that right now, which to me is political speak for, I haven't been told what to say about that yet. But you know, really, my big thing though is I'm not in ad hominem attacks on people. That's the 3rd thing in my platform. It's take back the government. 2, leave it better than you found it. And 3, be kind. Wisconsin Party, anybody that wants to join, you can. But the be kind part is really, we have to bring civility and talking about things and ideas, not talking about people back to politics. So I feel bad for Tony Evers in a lot of ways because he's getting blasted by attack ads as soon as he won the nomination. Boom, like the dark money, the PACs, and the Republican Party just start hammering him, even though there's plenty of things we can talk about. It turns into he's incompetent, he can't do his job, you know, all these things. And that's, to me, is wrong. We should have a forum like this. And Tony, if you're listening, and the next time, we're going to do this again. We've talked about this. We're going to look to schedule another one next month. And Tony, you're more than welcome to come and join us because this is the kind of audience I think you have to appeal to. You have to appeal to the 50% of people that don't vote because they're tired of broken politics. And you can make a difference. So this is my invite, our invite, I believe. Tony, come join us. And Scott, if you want, excuse me, I gotta be more formal. Governor Walker, if you want to join us, hey, the door's open, buddy.
Yep, I saw that video clip as well, and I was glad that Miles, that you did ask Tony if he would be interested. But I think we do have to understand that the candidates of the 2 big parties are not really in control of their own campaigns. This is being run by machinery. It's being run by an establishment that really is pulling all the strings. And as a candidate running under the umbrella of either the Democratic or the Republican Party, you're not, you put yourself at great risk if you step outside of what you have been coached to do. So even, I wish that the answer would have been absolutely yes, I'll debate anybody with one hand tied behind my back. I think it was a missed opportunity, actually, to take us up on that. But as Arnie just said, the invitation stands, and we will be doing this again. And I'd love to see a debate with all of the candidates at the table. I'm not sure how I'm not even sure how it's possible that a major debate is being held without all of the candidates at the table. That doesn't sound, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds like you're putting yourself at a risk of a lawsuit, actually, is what it sounds like. But I think that it would be, if I were in Tony Evers' place, I would really be thinking about what is the way that I can connect the most genuinely with the entire population of the state of Wisconsin, and isn't part of that taking every opportunity I can get to address the concerns and be with people who do not feel represented on the ballot. Wouldn't it be a good move potentially to show up at a debate like this and hear what we all have to say and answer the kinds of questions that people like us are coming up with? So that's all I have.
I like that answer. I think that Tony Evers, from the standpoint of his campaign and what he has to lose, made a good call. Because he doesn't stand to gain by debating with us, he stands to lose. He's in the uphill battle against Governor Walker, and so he needs every vote he can get, and he doesn't want exposure that might take away some of his votes. We would take away votes from both of the major candidates if we had a chance, but he stands more to lose, and Governor Walker, with a bigger war chest and everything else, has less to lose. So he can afford to stand up. But let's face it, our current political system is unidimensional, bipolar, yes or no, up or down. I like what Jill Stein says. Don't vote your fears, vote for the greater good. What we stand for is the opportunity to change those conversations and make them more nuanced. I think that his statement, his response was politically necessary. I also think it was cowardly, but that's another issue. And I join my colleagues in inviting both of the candidates to come have a nuanced conversation in front of people that are listening and not merely watching television. And I think that that's where our politics ought to go. And I also think, I don't know if you guys do, but I actually have an attorney that I signed a contract with to address potential legal issues. And I'm going to ask my attorney, is that something we even have a role for a lawsuit? And with that, I will pass.
We'll talk about that during the break, because we've done a little research into the FEC complaints that should come down not only on, well, not on the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, but on the actual television station that's airing the debate. There are guidelines for equal time that they're not following. So there's certainly grounds for something in that regard, but we can work together on that. But I'd like to point out everyone's answers, and I agree with them wholeheartedly. But let's not forget that the mainstream media in Wisconsin is just as complicit in this as the actual big parties. And I speak from a particular position of somebody who was offered on the first line of the Marquette poll, and the initial polling came out, and I was polling at 7% among registered voters, 6% among likely voters. So when Charles Franklin, to his immense credit, who runs the law school poll, and he's a very well-known pollster and has taken leadership positions in the National Polling Society, or whatever it's called, very well-regarded pollster, offered me that, and when he went on the shows after the polling came out, he correctly displayed, Walker, Evers, Anderson. I wish we were all offering, but we weren't. But it's just to make a point. But the media, much of the media, probably somewhere around 3/4 of the newspapers and television stations that reported on that, chose to remove my name from their reporting. So what does that tell you? It's not just lazy. Like before, when the polls offered just 2 candidates, and that's all they report instead of digging down into the numbers and seeing what really should be of interest or could be of interest to the citizens of Wisconsin, that's lazy. But when they take the time to remove a candidate who had a significant amount of support in the first round of polls off of their reporting, certainly they're complicit there, and it really shows what they're really up to. They are in cahoots, to borrow a phrase from my grandmother. They're in cahoots with the big political parties, and they're protecting a group of two parties that, because they raise the most money, because they're very corrupt, they raise a ton of money, they spend that money on television ads and radio ads in election season. So it's all together, not just the big parties, and everything that's been said is absolutely true. But keep that in mind too, and for our voices to be heard, we need to do things like this. We need to put pressure on everyone who will listen, particularly people who are willing to make phone calls and write letters and send emails to television stations, because they don't want to hear about it. They're not responsible for being part of that decision, but their organization certainly is part of the problem.
Okay, with that, we will take a 5-minute intermission.
All right. I'm not doing anything. I ain't gonna work at Vegas.
Yes.
How do we gain access to this video?
No. Yeah, no, you originally were on I saw you were originally on the page at 2 p.m. And I saw both. Yeah. That's my you gotta look it up. You're actually in the background of the video. Finally put up that video. The crazy mom's demand. I just held on to that footage for the longest time. I was like, it's my biggest fear. People think I'm going to be a Republican.
That's going around more.
Yeah, it's like, you get called a liberal, conservative the same day, you're probably doing something right.
Yeah. Speaking of that, is that something you would consider doing?
Oh yeah, put it on more debate. Oh yeah. Yeah, no, write down this is really focus. I mean, this Wisconsin International Radio Project, I've done things like
This is great.
years, made things, and I've got this whole other project.
I was gonna say,
Like I sat down with the guy who ran as a Republican against his mayor.
I was gonna say that, I forgot because I got.
Not your typical.
That was thanks to you for the Wisconsin. Because this is Wisconsin.
Nice guy.
This is so cool.
And I just, I actually think that we should join the Madison Club, like.
I have like 500 YouTube channels, but one specifically for this is called Wisconsin International Radio. Done interviews with her. Yeah, I've done interviews with Jill Stein, Trailer Park.
I'm surprised they haven't.
I've heard of.
I'm surprised that.
After working on
Surprised Scotty Walker didn't use eminent domain for this already. Headquarters are on
We talk about eminent domain, which we all.
I know, gosh, that's just so.
Like, I love the Constitution, but that's a serious point.
Well, part of the same things like,
Something that sent an email, I'm like, oh, this is tomorrow. It's good if somebody will let us.
You guys, you both know George Martin? Yep. Yeah, I've known George for, God, a decade. Todd here, both IBAW, and I've been, I'm not a vet myself, but I've been involved with.
Because we're so elected, organized.
Support Constitution.
We were in the.
There's.
Well, no, I would love to, like, seriously, my whole thing is.
There's still some questions left, however, we could just save them for the next. I think we'll go a little bit over that we talked about 8 o'clock, but I think we can go a little over. I think. In fact, for me, go running.
So when you mentioned one of the ways the CEOs do that, they couldn't do that. That's
An oversized button.
Versus principal. Sometimes, or like, it's justified movements. I don't believe that. I think we have to work it for the right reason. So it's hard to work but if you want to look and go back how we were relative with 21-year-old age and so I think but at the same time, they kind of shift that cost. We're not even debating about it. We're just like all agreeing. Well, there's some nuances and stuff, you know. We could go back and forth on things, but to me, it's just educational too. You go into some of this stuff. People don't know this active motion based on how they advertise to relations with educate yourself. Yeah, well, it's how it works, right? Education's good here.
I founded this company and I talked to all by the same didn't quite weren't all quite there. But what I have seen over the last decade, what is the acceleration of entrepreneurship
Where is it? I gotta change the camera. It's stay on automatically. Mine needs to roll. The drink there, and the drink there. But the
Miles, I'm gonna go do a nervous pee and then I'll be back.
Okay.
mine is the part where it's recording.
It's mirrored on the other side.
Yes.
That's a job. That's something that it's almost like someone would pay to work for that. That's what I'm going to do. So that's why I'm like, I'm done. I've done other podcasts. I got it split in like whole days at the I have a whole display right now, actually. I've been down, coming down, no, coming down, right when you walk in.
This is totally.
So, it's like a trip around the world.
Which case it would make you.
Remaining questions? We're gonna just go like really quick. And it'll be a little bit easier, I think, to answer just where do you stand on the issue. And I'll do maybe a couple of the questions with just a show of hands. And we'll start up as soon as Michael gets back, and then be done with 20 minutes.
Check, check, check. Okay, everybody, we'll be starting back up in a minute.
That's what I
Did you drive all today? Oh, so you stopped. Okay.
The story about Terry in Ohio, like trying to get
Yeah, I know. He's trying to hold hands. It's kind of
What year he won his Nobel Peace Prize, whatever country it is, and he asked for self-process. There's one, but more was there then than it
Part two, starting back up in 1 minute.
If the candidates will please resume their spots.
They all left. And they have trained areas of this and gone back 10 years later where it's been working. It's going to resurface go together. You said we couldn't debate it.
Okay. We're streaming right now on Wisconsin International Radio on YouTube, and then I'll be posting everything to there to the Facebook and YouTube page for Wisconsin International Radio. But I mean, if you look up Miles Kristen, you'll find hundreds of videos, but a few dozen specifically on this election.
Okay, so you're talking about
Yeah. No problem.
Round two, starting in a few seconds. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've discussed with the candidates. We're going to go through some of the following questions rather quickly and limit the candidates to 1 minute on some of these questions. We'll be starting in a few seconds.
First time we started, we'll be at 2. That's where you're going.
Bullet points, bullet points. All right.
It's Maggie's turn, right?
Yes. Okay, and we will start with Maggie.
Thanks, Phil.
I'll get you for this, Phil.
All right, there has been much discussion on the Foxconn deal, but little mention to the $250 million that was paid to the Milwaukee Bucks Arena, with both Governor Scott Walker and Democratic Lieutenant Governor candidate Mandela Barnes supporting this. Where do you stand on taxpayer funding of private sports arenas, and had you been governor, would you have vetoed it?
Look, the problem I have with these really big tax dollar giveaways is that they make us vulnerable instead of building up a diverse network. If I was going to throw taxpayer dollars at anything, I would want it to be in revitalizing our locally owned business communities in towns all over the state of Wisconsin, and revitalizing some of our downtown areas, including green spaces, so that when people come, their families want to stay long term. But I can think of a lot of really great uses for that money that would actually build a more robust economy instead of putting more and more and more eggs in fewer and fewer baskets.
I would have vetoed it. I think that government does have a role in supporting some sports and other cultural things that enrich the whole community, but just not the ones that Governor Walker can reach the whole state. So I would have vetoed it. Less than 10 seconds.
Wow.
That's a record. Let the record show. I would have vetoed it too. I'm against any sort of government giveaways to businesses in this fashion. The Milwaukee Bucks, Foxconn, Quick Trip, if you're familiar with that issue. Quick Trip got a $200 million grant. Quick Trip, which is the most successful chain of convenience stores and gas stations in the history of mankind, probably. Got a $200 million grant from the WEDC, and ironically maybe gave Governor Walker a $95,000 campaign contribution. All of these things are corrupt. And let's not forget, when we talk about taxpayer dollars or spending, this is all money that if it remained in the community, if it remained in people's pockets, they would be spending or investing or saving. And the economic multipliers that exist with the Bucks and the Foxconn or Weber still exist. They're just not as sexy as a huge corporation or a basketball team. Let's let people decide how they should spend their money. Let Wisconsin grow from within, and let people make their own decisions in their own communities about how they're going to spend their money, if at all possible.
You started it late, Phil. But that's okay, we'll keep it short. I would have vetoed the heck out of those things too, because government doesn't belong in the business of investing in private businesses. If you really believe about the separation of that, and that market should rule what happens, well, you should have government funding entertainment complexes for people. Give me a break. The Bucks guys are billionaires, and we're sitting there spending all this money in Milwaukee, which has so many other needs, or the Marquette Interchange, or so many other things that could have been fixed or dealt with, and they can't have enough money in their public school funding to buy art supplies for their students. But we can build a goddamn stadium for the Milwaukee Bucks. Something patently wrong about that, in my opinion. But it's not just these entertainment complexes like Phil was getting at with Quick Trip and the like. You know, it's also large multinational corporations. I know a lot of people in Oshkosh Court. I wish them well, but man, they got prime property, and you got the TIF district built for them. And the city of Oshkosh gave them lakefront property. It's ridiculous. You know, we have to stop subsidizing corporations at the expense of community. And it's just point blank right, but that's crony corruption stuff happening again and again and again. And if we keep voting, it's going to change, because both parties support these things. And they say it's going to lead to economic development, perhaps, with like the Bucks, right? But what are you going to do? You're going to get, at best, minimum wage $10 an hour jobs out of the thing. I know I'm done, sorry.
Okay, this is going to be a question by a show of favor of the legalization of marijuana both for medicinal and recreational use. Let the record show all 4 candidates are in complete support of that issue.
Tax-free too.
Starting with Michael White. That brings us to our next question. Starting with Michael White, and where do you all differ on the regulations surrounding marijuana? Starting with Michael White.
Where do I differ from the other candidates? I'm not sure that I do, because this is an issue that I have thought about in some detail. I know that our current system doesn't work. I know that we are putting people in jail for non-violent drug crimes, filling up our jails. We're doing it disproportionately the certain ethnic groups and socioeconomic groups. I'm not sure that I differ with anybody on this one.
Yeah, I don't know everyone's position here, but when I stood on the stage at the March for Cannabis in May in Milwaukee with 6 Democrats, the first thing out of their mouth was, we need to legalize marijuana because of $200 million in projected tax revenue, which we could then spend on something else. And the people that enjoy marijuana recreationally, but in particular the people that use it medicinally, need that. They don't need it to be taxed. They need it to be as little taxed and as available as possible, and it should be, because it should be something that you can grow in your backyard and sell on your front porch. It's just a very simple thing that God created for us to use. It's good for people in many ways. It's better than actually the scotch that's in front of me right now. Not that I would be smoking marijuana if the scotch weren't available. However, my point is that we all know that the majority of people in Wisconsin know that, and the government's not responding. So my position is it should be as tax-free as tomatoes.
I don't think you can regulate plants. You know, I mean, really, it's a plant. And how can you even tax it? It grows, it's a weed, they call it weed. Okay. Yeah, I think it's just a step further too, though, that there's a lot of medicinal qualities in a lot of different plants that also can be used for recreational purposes. I think that things like magic mushrooms have a place in society. But then people talk about going down a slippery slope of drug addiction and it's not good for our society, et cetera, et cetera. The only time people care about something not being good for society from our leaders of our free world is when they can't make a buck off of it. If they can't make a buck off of it, then they make it illegal. So they're plants, let's use them and realize the benefits of them. And regarding another aspect around going even further down opiates and opioid crisis, because people talk about this war on drug as a whole spectrum of stuff. We have to stop that too. The war on drugs is bad, and marijuana is not a gateway drug. And when you declare war on something, I think you automatically lose. We've never won the war on drugs. We spend, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars, if not billions of dollars a year against it. We never finished the war on poverty. The war on terror, well, we're really getting our butt kicked on that. So I don't know why we're pretending to do all these things through large government programs. So anyway, I could keep going, but I won't, maybe.
Arnie gets 5 minutes. We get them. I actually enjoy your responses, so no worries. Well, I mean, okay, so maybe I'll step away from everybody else at the table slightly on this. I think that, you know, in the situation that we're in, the real world that we're in, while I agree that it would be great to just have completely free use of marijuana, grow whatever you want, use it whatever way you want to, no taxing, I think that perhaps a more likely scenario is that we legalize it and regulate it the way alcohol is, so that we have laws against minors using it. There is a tax revenue that then can go into, for example, drug rehabilitation programs. But I do think that this is however, whether it's taxed or not, it needs to be legalized, because this is the most racially biased law that there is, right? I mean, African Americans are more likely to be pulled over, they're more likely to be searched, they're more likely to be charged, they're more likely to be found guilty, they're more likely to be sentenced at the maximum, you know, possible penalty for this, and then it's just a downward spiral from there. So not only does it need to be legalized, but people who are serving time for possession or use of marijuana need to be pardoned and allowed back into society, and their records expunged, as Phil was saying earlier. I completely agree with that. But the other thing is that when we legalize marijuana, I want to make sure that there are protections in place so that any licensure around growing and selling marijuana is equally available to people regardless of their gender or race, because that is something that we are seeing in states that have legalization, that it is still harder for minorities to get certified to be able to produce and sell it, because we're so racist and we're just so biased. So I would want to make sure that was addressed as well.
Since I was so short, I want 20 extra seconds. Number one, I agree with her on virtually everything. Number two, there's an article in the New England Journal of Medicine which documents that nicotine is a gateway drug for cocaine. All right? You need to understand that. Number three, the FDA was denied the ability to regulate nicotine as a substance, and that was a mistake. We have a burgeoning problem which is going to lead to a lot greater problems than marijuana has, and that's vaping and e-cigs, and that needs to be addressed. And I'm done.
Starting with Phil, what issue most defines your gubernatorial campaign?
The biggest issue that we talk about, and it's pretty broad actually, is local control. The idea that you have the right to live your life as you choose if you're not, as long as you're not interfering with somebody else's right to do the same thing. Addresses pretty much every issue that's before us. I've talked about in terms of education, criminal justice reform, economics, Foxconn, all of those things. We have a broken relationship with government. We do. We don't really have a representative government anymore. You can read in papers and hear direct testimony from members of this state legislature as well as members of Congress where they're not reading the bills, they're not writing the expected to vote for the bills, and those bills are written by departments of the government, in the best case scenario, or by the actual lobbies themselves. I was personally involved in the issue when Uber was legalized in Wisconsin because I was managing a taxi company at the time. And the Americans for Prosperity basically wrote the bill on behalf of Google, put it on the state legislator's desk. They voted for it. They had public testimony. I sat there in front of them. Mayor Soglin sat in front of them. Many people did and said, here's what's wrong with it, even addressing their own issues with how independent contractors were classified. But they didn't listen. They nodded their head. They thanked me for my testimony. They voted in. That's how our government works. That's what we need to get local control, because that can happen when all of our representatives are in Madison where we can't see them and watch them as we should. But if they're at our city council meetings and our neighborhood associations and in our families where we're making decisions for ourselves, then that's going to not happen as much.
You forgot ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. So like this is a lot of educational stuff too, right? And I agree with Phil that those are huge issues that we have to address. Our government isn't our own. That's the first thing I read again, take back to government. But for me, the biggest single issue is still living in concert with the world around us. I mean, we're in endgame scenarios, and people don't want to hear that, but when you have 7.6 billion people on the planet, heading to 10 billion people by the year 2050, and to think that you're going to grow your way out of problems with it, you're insane. We have carrying capacity. It's this concept about what a system can sustain. We're at the limits of growth. And you can argue about climate change, and I don't. I think climate change is real, but a lot of people who think it's bunk science, sure, I'll give you that. So there's the Stockholm Institute, the Stockholm Center has 9 markers for sustainability within our environment. And by their number, we've exceeded 4 of them already, right? And so throughout CO2 emissions, that means 3 that we've exceeded already. And it's all about our ability to have a system that can sustain human life. And the other thing I'm going to say real quick, because I'm almost up already, is that it's not about sustainability. I want to start using other words. I want to use the word reciprocity more. That we don't have to live thinking that the earth has to sustain us. We have to start thinking that we have to sustain it. And that requires reciprocity and more respect for the world around us. And we have to use government as the only crack that we have in the door to start doing that, because we have to have these conversations. People want to have these conversations, but we get told, now we got to make middle class America great again. Like, or we have to grow the middle class and take money away from these guys and give it to this special interest group. They're all special interest groups. They're all goddamn greedy. Let's stop playing that game and look at the bigger issues. Sorry.
I completely agree with that. I think that our future really does depend on learning how to be a part of the living Earth system and understanding that this really is the only planet that we have. Even if we find other planets around other stars that can sustain life, we're not going to just go there and insert ourselves into that ecosystem and expect to be, supported by it. But when I think about all of these problems that we're facing socially and environmentally, I keep coming back to the way that we govern ourselves. And for me, it really does come down to the way that we elect our leadership right now as just boots on the ground. The thing that needs to be changed really is our voting system. I want to see ranked choice voting, and I want to see automatic voter registration. I don't think being registered to vote should be a big ordeal for people. If you interact with the DMV, you can get registered to vote. Make it an opt-out instead of a hurdle that you have to scale. So just changing those things, to me, I think really opens the door to being able to then immediately start making meaningful progress on the environmental front, restoring our waterways, making sure we have shoreline, literally shoring up our waterways from chemical runoff from farms. And all of the other, healthcare, everything that is so important that's facing us right now. I think it really begins with how we participate in government and establish a government that's of by and for the people.
I like having a smarter woman sitting next to me. I agree with everything she said, but my number one issue is there is no planet B. We are running out of time to save our children's future. That's ecological destruction, that's invasive species. Our energy is being bought on credit, and our children are gonna have to pay the interest. And if we don't do something soon to fix the problem, it will become something that cannot be fixed. That's my number one issue. Everything else comes after that, but I agree with all the other things people are talking about.
Okay, we have two last questions, and then we'll have the closing remarks. Next question is, what will you as governor do to stop the corruption and crony capitalism?
1 minute, right? Okay, wow. Well, okay, the easiest way to address this, in my opinion, is you gotta cut Madison down to size. Within the state of Wisconsin, if you take the money away, then the cockroaches will scatter, right? So everything gets centralized in Madison, and all this power resides there, and that's why real estate's so expensive in Madison. You know, I'm not saying politicians are bad, but the system is bad. You have to take all the money that we get through income tax and sales tax and write some formula and redistribute it back to local municipalities. The best government is the government that governs closest to the people. So if you do that, then local communities will have their own standards. We should have statewide laws that we do need to put into place around campaign election, term limits, the inability to go in between working for lobbyist organizations and government agencies that regulate those industries and have lockout periods for 7 years. There's a whole section on my website about this. But the big thing though is get the money away, push it all back to where it came from, because that's where people should be able to make the decisions within, while still maintaining social cohesion. There, I did it, wow.
All right, I'm going to see if I can do that too. So I think we're in an interesting situation right now with the legislature being split basically evenly between the Democrats and the Republicans. Nobody has a veto-proof majority. And so an independent governor could come in and insist on consensus, and not just consensus, but policy making, but insist on demonstrated community support from the localities that these representatives are coming from, and that's like really unorthodox, right? To demand more than a majority vote in order to pass laws. But if I would like to do the experiment. You know, what happens if I say I refuse to sign any new laws? And so you're either going to have to come together and negotiate so that you have a veto-proof majority, or maybe I'll make some concession there, but you have to show me community support, broad community support for the policies that you are wanting to sign into law. And that means I need to be hearing from your constituents that people are broadly in favor of these policies.
Now, I don't know if it's the case in Wisconsin, but in some states, if the governor doesn't sign a law, it still goes into effect unless it's vetoed. But I like her idea. I think that the first thing I would do is do anything in the governor's power to get corporate money out of politics and to shine the light of government on the excessive use of corporate money to influence politics, because I think the governor has some ability to do that. That's number one. Number two, I think all four of us at this table would be better than either of the two candidates, precisely because we are not locked in to the Tweedledum versus Tweedledee, I'm bigger and badder than you are, of the two parties trying to prove they're bigger and badder than the other party and they can push the other party around. The four people at this table are unanimous in wanting to address the issues on the principles as opposed to party dogma. So that's what I would do.
Well, those are some magnificent answers, and I swear you just read our website about local control that generated. I know, we're very much in agreement, but that's very, very powerful testimony. And so I agree with what's being set up here, especially what Arnie mentioned about shrinking government. If you get rid of the garbage, the cockroaches go away. Is that how you said it? It's exactly true. Right now, no matter what we do, and we've seen in attempts at campaign finance reform before, is that no matter what laws you put in place that say you can't give money or you can't give more than this money, the money will still flow in some way, shape, or form. There's always ways to reward people, and if you want to read about how committee chairmanships are handed out in Washington, D.C., it's a sad, sad story of people paying to have committee chairmanships in exchange for raising money for their big parties. So it's a travesty. But to put a more near-term point on it, there's two things that I do right away. Number one, in my very first budget, it would be small, first of all. And anything that was in the budget that the Republicans or Democrats or both wanted, they would have to demonstrate that it was working, that it was needed, that it couldn't be done on a more local level, that it couldn't be done more efficiently by the private sector. Otherwise, the governor of Wisconsin has a unique power, not 100% unique, but the line item veto. And you can threaten, basically, to veto things right out of the budget if they're cronyism, and you can see right through it. And if it's not, as Maggie pointed out, it's just something that's supported by the local economy. And second of all, and this is an easy one, get rid of the WEDC, which is basically a government organization that only serves the purpose of taking taxpayers' money and handing it out to corporations who support the current administration. And the Republicans aren't the only ones who were guilty. Before that, the Department of Commerce did the same thing. So they'll both do the same thing. Listen to Tony Evers, he'll say get rid of the WEDC, he'll just put something else in its place. So there's concrete things we do right away and try to reform the system as we go along.
What's the WEC?
The WEDC, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, the source of all evil money, or actually the instrument of all evil money.
That's for the people listening, because not everybody knows all these.
It is what is supposedly going to facilitate the Foxconn deal, but all the other horror stories that you hear of the state giving away money to corporations that then leave without creating any jobs, as they have in Port Edwards, companies that fail before ever starting, but they never pay it back, and they happen to be donors to the Walker campaign or whoever. The WEDC is the organization that facilitates all that.
Could be an issue with tips too.
Yeah, there's all kinds of. The money will flow unless we make the government less powerful.
Okay, last question. We'll start with Maggie Turnbull. And I will take away the time restrictions for this one, seeing as it's one of the most serious issues facing Wisconsin. What is your plan to address the fact that black incarceration rate in Wisconsin is the second highest in the United States?
Okay, I think, for a lot of people, I think the first place our mind goes is back to drug laws and marijuana laws and, people being convicted for nonviolent crimes at much higher rates. So definitely that is part of the story, legalizing marijuana. However, I think that, this really comes back to, for me, the disparity in the educational system. Education. I feel like that would be my whole answer, that we really do need to equalize the funding between districts. Right now, the way the funding formula works, children are not all worth the same amount. If you live in an affluent, white, suburban neighborhood, you probably have a lot more in dollars going into your child's education than if you are in inner city Milwaukee. And that needs to be equalized. We have to really invest in these schools so that children coming up through those systems have a good chance, a really good fighting chance of having a lot of options other than whatever, crime or whatever else is going on in their neighborhood. So we need to go back to the schools. And I'm going to stop talking because I'm getting tired and saying clumsier and clumsier things.
She hasn't said anything dumb yet. So I grew up in Detroit. My dad disappeared when I was 6. My mom was a teacher, and we moved around a lot. I was mugged and pistol whipped when I was in med school. So I also went to inner city Detroit schools for some of my education. And I agree completely with Maggie that education is the way out. But if you don't have equal opportunity for health care, if you don't have, if you live in an area that has no grocery stores, if you're in a grocery store desert, if you don't do something about unequal opportunities, you're never going to fix the problem. I don't know what all the answers are, but I do know that we need to start by addressing inequalities to the extent that we can. We have programs that have been shown to work, Head Start, which then got defunded. I would find the things that will work, I would find out what the communities believe that they need, and I would do everything within the governor's power to bring those to the legislature and say, fix this. Because the power of the governor at that point becomes one of persuasion. How many people here know where Pine Ridge is and who went there? Only a couple. It was an Indian reservation, which is just as poor now as it was when Bobby Kennedy visited it. The government, in particular, has the governor to go places, has the power to go places and highlight problems and shame the system into working. The governor's office is a bully pulpit to bring problems to the fore. I would not only address our blacks, what about our Native Americans in the state of Minnesota? The risk of a Native American child being taken away and put it in foster care is 22 times higher than a white. I don't know what the number is for Wisconsin, but our Native American, our First Peoples have been ignored systematically. If I were governor, I would find as many of those things as I could, highlight them, and challenge people to do something about it. I pass.
Well, I might be remarkably quick, since you already heard my criminal justice probably 3.5 minutes worth. I agree with the two things that need to be done. We need criminal justice reform, starting with legalizing marijuana and ending the racist war on drugs. And we do need help for our educational system, but I disagree with the order in which you guys put them forward. One of the reasons that poor black kids do so poorly in school and have those educational outcomes is not because there's not enough money being spent. There could be more money spent, but because they're coming from homes where the families have been destroyed by a radically racist criminal justice system. And if we just start the process of putting people back in their communities, back with their families, getting them out of jail, stop sending them to jail, then we give an opportunity for those families that are the most at risk to heal, to be united, to have two parents in a home if that's what they choose, to have more supervision in school, and then those outcomes will follow because the parents who care about their kids and they'll supervise them better, encourage their homework better, and they'll be more involved not only in the lives of their kids but in the business of the school district. When you have one-parent families, especially when the families might have been given up on the whole political process because of the many things that I cited, they're not going to school board meetings. They're not engaged in the politics of getting these things done. But if we help put families back together by de-incarcerating people that shouldn't be in jail in the first place, then they have an opportunity to take control of their future. And the answer isn't necessarily more government spending. It's more freedom and more whole families that can enact the things that we believe that human beings naturally do in their natural loving state, and that is take care of their kids, earn a living, and choose to live their lives as they choose and respect other people's right to do so.
Get to go last. That makes it a little bit tougher, but in a way, it's also easier because these guys have a lot of great points around this. It's a tough problem, right? In that we have to call out the truth where we see it. It's like what Dr. Martin Luther King said, you have to call out injustice when you see it. Right? We do have institutionalized racism in our country. We have it at the state level, we have it at a local level, we have it in our society. We have to realize that. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard around us and call it out when we see it. And it's become systemic in our society because we've allowed it to, because it gives advantageous positions to special interest groups. Right? You want high prison population because it's a private prison system. People make money off of it. So hey, we need to keep this pipeline going, right? It's also a way for municipalities to raise money through all those nickel and dime stops they made at the time. It's also mandatory sentencing. Clinton said it was the wrong thing to do, but we still haven't unwound it yet. There's so much stuff that we have to do that's ridiculous around it. Ultimately, it's about us as a society choosing to quote Lincoln, follow the better angels of our nature with stuff where we deal with each other and we deal with society around us. Because we don't. We often blame people. We feel like we're our own victims. We feel like it's not me, it's everybody else. But it is us. And we have to call it out when we see it. And if we really want to address the stuff in the communities where people are hurting the most, we can sit around, all of us guys sitting here with ladies and stuff, and think about all these great policy things. But what you have to ultimately do, you have to go and ask them. We have to go into the communities where people are hurting the most and say, how can I help you? I bet you're tired of us coming here and telling you guys how we can solve your goddamn problems, and we're failing at it. How can we help you? So that's where I probably start as governor. I don't know though, because like what Dr. White said, I don't have all the answers. This is tough stuff. So.
Okay, at this time we'll start with closing remarks, starting with Michael White.
I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Miles for making this possible. and for my partners here who did a lot of the arranging to pull us all together and reschedule things so I could come here. I think we are setting a standard that we need to adhere to moving forward. We are demonstrating civility and idea exchange in the process. We are listening to one another. We are answering questions directly, and that's what politics needs. We need to get back to a civil discourse, a discourse of ideas and respect, and away from mindless tribalism. We need to focus on fixing the answers in our society and taking care of our children's future. And I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I deserve your vote, but I also have to admit, so does everybody else at this table. Every person sitting up here is a better candidate than the two people that are running. We don't take corporate money. We have not been bought and paid for. We are entering into this at our own expense. In addition to whatever we're doing otherwise, we are not professional politicians. We are patriots, and we're devoted to the future. Thank you.
Well, that was beautiful, and echoes a bunch of my sentiments as well. We need to proceed forward with the idea that government has failed us in so many ways, and I think that's one of the things that we have agreed upon for the most part on this stage tonight. We have a fundamental problem with the way that people relate to government, what government has done to take away our liberties and even our representation. And all the issues that we've talked about tonight, the way that we can break through is by following the idea of local control and by understanding that the rights belong to us, they don't belong to government, they don't even belong to majorities as much as we tend to love democracy. A majority shouldn't be allowed to take the rights away that you have as a human being living in Wisconsin. We need to honor that. And I'd also like to echo something that Dr. White said earlier, and that is offering everyone a job if he's elected. I do the same thing, and that sounds sort of funny and self-serving, but I want to point something out. Unfortunately, up to now, it would be ideal if everyone were offered in the polls, and they should be. But at least if you get asked a question about polling numbers, or you are polled, or you know people that are going to be taking these questions, the idea that if one of us breaks through, we all sort of break through is very, very true. The forces that are against us are Democrats and Republicans, and all of us here are threats to that. So insofar as any of us can insert ourselves into the conversation, get a one-on-one with Walker or Evers, or be involved in a debate or whatever it might be, we all benefit. All of us, not just us, but all the people of Wisconsin benefit. So please look at how the polling's going, what the media says, be active on social media, represent the idea that Democrats and Republicans are not the only two choices, that the rest of us up here are choices, and when you have a chance to witness to the idea that what the government, what the parties, and what the media is doing is wrong, please do so and help us break through, be part of the conversation with the larger mainstream media and the general population of Wisconsin.
Thanks, I'll keep this short. I want to thank everybody that's here, everybody that's online on the stream, everybody that will watch this in the future for posterity's sake. Thanks for listening through this hour and a half, hour 45-minute thing, which is interminably long, but it's cool. And I want to thank everybody else up here, right? Dr. Michael White, great. It's great to meet you. Maggie for organizing this. She did a great job. She's a member of the Madison Elks Club in this facility. Thanks for hosting this beautiful place. And Philip Anderson for being here, and everybody else that's here right now. It's awesome. This is an opportunity for us to talk to more people than we would otherwise be able to reach. And by having a shared voice, many more people can hear us. But lastly, I just want to say as a closing remark that we are facing huge issues in our society, and we're pulling each other apart. And the vitriol and the hatred that we display all the time has got to stop. I reference back to Lincoln and the better angels of our nature. But we have to do that. I mean, we have to have civic conversations with each other. We have to stop putting our differences, and we have to start really loving each other. I mean, we're here for a reason. It's not to have the most toys when you die. It's not to own more stuff, because like Tyler Durden said in Fight Club, we talked about this with somebody before, right? Do you own your stuff, or does your stuff own you? We have to stop thinking about greed, special interest groups, and I want my piece of a pie. It's about the greater good, and it's about compassion for everything around you in life and all its manifestations. Sounds preachy as hell, but you know what? We need it. We have to start thinking like that instead of just thinking purely political and power grabs and power generation, how you apply it. So anyways, thanks for coming.
Well, I think that stepping outside of the two-party system is going to happen, and it's going to be really good for all of us. It's going to open up a lot of opportunities for the ballot to be a lot more interesting and a lot more diverse and engaging a lot more civic participation and excitement about going to the polls. So, I thank all of you for being here tonight to witness this. And this is what our political discourse could look like. And it's what it does look like, because that's what we're creating here. But we can do so much better than the big money dominated political system. But I want to see more diversity on that ballot. And I've grown very accustomed in my life to being the only woman at the table, literally. This is very much what the situation is for me professionally, everywhere I go as well. But we, as women, there is no reason why we should not be circulating through the highest offices in the land. We have a perspective to offer that is slightly different, and oftentimes a way of approaching problems that it reflects a different experience growing up. So I think that it's really important to have more diversity on the ballot, and moving toward an electoral system that can support that is going to be good for us in the long run. But yeah, I wanted to thank the Madison Elks Club as well, and just welcome all of you to the Elks Club if you haven't been here before. And if you're in Madison, let's all consider, it's actually not very expensive to join the Elks Club, and they're a community service organization that I consider to have a lot of untapped potential. So for younger people coming in who don't already belong to an organization, or of any age who don't already belong to an organization, look at this wonderful facility, and the fact that it was available to us for free tonight because I'm a member. That's incredible. So think about it. But yeah, so and I just wanted to share a fun little anecdote. I noticed this week that I was in my office and taking a telecon and whatever, and I noticed, I have my diplomas hanging on the wall, and I have a master's degree and a PhD, and at the bottom of those diplomas is signed by the governor of the state. And at the time, and I did my master's and PhD in Arizona, and both of them were signed by female governors in the state of Arizona. So Janet Napolitano and Jane Hall. And I saw that, I just finally noticed that this week after how many years? I mean, I'm like 14 years out of my PhD. I just finally noticed that. But I think it's a brilliant thing to imagine a world where this is the norm, where men and women and people of color are circulating through the highest offices. Keep holding that vision, because we will get there. Thanks.
Okay, everybody, that concludes our debate. I'd like to first thank the 4 candidates for being here tonight. I'd like to thank the Elks Club, and a quick reminder that all the footage will be on Wisconsin International Radio, both YouTube and Facebook, so like and subscribe to those pages to see the clips and full video from tonight's debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles.
I got a text that we left it on during intermission, and there's some conversations people thought were in private that were live streamed. Professor that got thrown out of the
I remember when we first
I'll grab all of you and we'll do this quick 15 seconds. Broadcasters Association.
Great job.
Say goodbye to you guys.
You guys move yours?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for coming. I really
Job well
appreciate
done.
everything you're ever gonna know. Because man, it's good to be able to see people out there that they can visualize stuff, you know. I'll check.
Politics and
Think of
Oh, yeah, my microphone.
No, that would be awesome if that works. What I'll do, I'll check on ownership. Yeah. That'd be so cool. Yeah, because it's especially cool that those private house people that want to help. Yeah. We get the students over there, right? Oh, you know what we'll do is I'll buy a half barrel of beer and say free beer, stay free bud.
Wait, you said the magic words. What are you
Oh no, so yeah, look there, yeah.
Thank you for watching, everyone.